Lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise, listening skies, let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song
Full of the faith that the dark past has
taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun, a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Victory is won. God of our wearies, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Bless our feet straight from the places, our God, where we met thee. Bless our hearts drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadow beneath thy hand, ever stand. True to our God, true to our God, true to our God, true to our God, true to our native land.
Recognize our own gifts and abilities and to use them as best we can, fulfilling your intention to help uplift the entire human race according to your plan of redemption. We pray in the precious and powerful name of the Prince of Peace, the Lord of Lords, the Lily of the Valley, the bright and morning star, our Savior, Redeemer, Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Good evening again, all. Welcome to the Consul General of Barbados' program for Black History Month. Before I go on, let me say to those who are on that there's obviously an issue with the Zoom. We have a platform that can hold 500 people. So ask your friends. I understand that there are more than 100 people who are trying to get on. We're trying to troubleshoot, but I'm not a technical person, so you can ask them to bear with us. We'll try to get it on YouTube or another platform in a minute. Meanwhile, we have to continue. I confess I am not a fan of Black History Month. How do you separate something from the whole, especially when it is the essence of the whole? That is like a turnover without coconut. cuckoo without okra. Anytime something is separated from its rightful and just place in daily life, separated from what should be part of the ongoing discourse and teaching and learning process as a natural occurrence, that is consigning it to a lesser and disrespectful place. Assigning special category status to what should be integral is just another way of removing, of inviting judgment, of separating, of subtly or not so subtly saying, you are different and not part of us. That is why I am not a fan of Black History Month. The fact is, to disconnect Black history into a single month is like removing the heart from the body. Because minus Native Americans, Black history is essential to American history. In fact, Black history is American history. There is not one without the other. There can be no true American history without Black history as the base. America without the massive contributions and exploits of Blacks and their suffering and fight for change as part of the narrative side by side with whatever is said about whites and the development of modern America is to shortchange Black history. My position, and I state it firmly, is that Black history should not be separated out for a flood of adulation once a year, as with the other flood, recede and is forgotten until another 12 months. And it cannot only be about the celebrity side and the first. All of our pioneers and ceiling breakers are part of the narrative. That is true. But we must not continue to lose knowledge of those who invented, who changed lives through laws, who changed life through death, and we can go on and on. Further, we must dig up the stories of those buried, especially in the areas that we do not usually discuss. So the true picture of Black history, American history, world history is complete. We need more hidden figures. If you haven't seen the movie, see it and then do the research about those in it. Funny enough, after the Black Lives Movement last year, I thought there would be a flood of programs this year, but I didn't see that. That is how easily we forget or are forgotten without the daily reinforcement of all that we are. But if Black History Month is the only time for Black people to claim their culture and heritage and to have a discourse on the rich transformative contributions of Black people, I guess I will take it, even though I'm not so sure we too are not being complicit in this negation of Black history by perpetuating the myth of a Black History Month. Every month, every day should be Black History Month, just as it is White History Month day, each day and each month. Our contributions this year will be in two presentations. This one will look at a number of Barbadians who have made impact in foreign places. It is said that there's a Barbadian everywhere. And yes, historical Barbadians are somewhat like Black American history, fascinating and never ending. Last year, when invited to participate in Africa Day, in researching, I came across two Barbadian families, the Ford and the Barclays. We will speak of them today. The dreaded COVID-19 pandemic threw up Ken Farnham. I had a conversation with journalist Tony Best, who was warned about Farnham, while I had absolutely no clue. How could this Barbadian, who was a top sportsman and a ceiling breaker, not be known? Well, today we shall know. There's what I think is a rather unique story about the family called the Bridgetowners, not the Bridgertons. And sometimes, I don't think too often though, history is made by the most unlikely of people. Today, we will hear that side as well. Black History Month grew out of the Negro History Week, an observance established in 1926 by author and historian Carter G. Woodson during the second week of February, which spans the birthdays of abolitionist leader Frederick Douglass and the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. It was moved to a month celebration in 1976. That, my friends, is 45 years ago. It is high time to evolve Black history into full integration. For those who believe in short steps, let us agree that every month of every year, there will be an activity or program devoted to Black history. In the meantime, thank you for taking the time today to be part of this program. History is a long thing, and this will be quite a long evening. We're gonna take full advantage of having you here to give full vent to those that we will present. There will be no shortchanging here. Make yourselves comfortable, keep yourselves muted, put your comments and questions in the Zoom chat, and I trust you will enjoy. We thought we would start it with a light note, a nice dance there from Miss Ashley Braffett to the song Morecambe, which is, if you know the lyrics, very appropriate for the times. We're going to move in to the serious part of the day, and we're going to have a video followed by a bio on our first personality, a man called Joe Fortes, who was born in Barbados. Some will say he was born in Trinidad, but we are going to claim him anyhow. That will be followed by two videos, one behind the other. Vancouver named him their citizen of the century. Who is that? A man called Joe. Yes, Joe. Simple name, very simple man. How does a simple Barbadian become the citizen of the century in a province of Canada and still impacts that province all these years later? This is the story of Joe Fortes, a Barbadian with a massive impact.
Joe Fortes, a great Barbadian, 1863 to 1922. You have to be special to be remembered widely decades after your death. You have to be extraordinarily special to be voted most outstanding citizen of the century. That you gain this singular award based on a life beginning in the 19th century and ending in the early 20th century as a Black man means you were in a stratosphere all by yourself. And there is more. That you did all of this as a most ordinary person, in all respect by society's measurements, at the bottom end of the scale, is beyond belief. But this and more was achieved by Joseph Joe Seraphin Fortes, who was born in Bridgetown, Barbados, on February 9th, 1863. Now, some accounts, as you will hear later, suggest he was born in Trinidad. What is not in doubt is that his father was a Barbadian of full African blood, and his mother was entirely or largely Spanish or Portuguese. So we will claim him anyway. He became a legend in his lifetime, and after his death in Vancouver, Canada, his legacy is still celebrated to this day by ordinary citizens. Leaving home at 17, in short time he became a known figure wherever he went, and a dominant figure in the early history of Vancouver, Canada. He first went to Britain, where he worked in Liverpool for about 5 years. He learned to swim at St. George's Baths and quickly became a swimmer and a diver of some note. He won a 3-mile race across the Mersey River, received a gold medal for life saving, and exhibited his talents as part of an 11-person swim team in a tour of Joe Fortes, a great Barbadian, 1863 to 1922. You have to be special to be remembered widely decades after your death. You have to be extraordinarily special to be voted most outstanding citizen of the century. That you gain this singular award based on a life beginning in the 19th century and ending in the early 20th century as a Black man means you were in a stratosphere all by yourself. And there's more. That you did all of this as a most ordinary person, in all respect by society's measurements, at the bottom end of the scale, is beyond belief. But this and more was achieved by Joseph Joe Seraphin Fortes, who was born in Bridgetown, Barbados, on February 9th, 1863. Now, some accounts, as you will hear later, suggest he was born in Trinidad. What is not in doubt is that his father was a Barbadian of full African blood, and his mother was entirely or largely Spanish or Portuguese. So we will claim him anyway. He became a legend in his lifetime, and after his death in Vancouver, Canada, his legacy is still celebrated to this day by ordinary citizens. Leaving home at 17, in short time he became a known figure wherever he went, and a dominant figure in the early history of Vancouver, Canada. He first went to Britain, where he worked in Liverpool for about 5 years. He learned to swim at St. George's Baths and quickly became a swimmer and a diver of some note. He won a 3-mile race across the Mersey River, received a gold medal for life-saving, and exhibited his talents as part of an 11-person swim team in a tour of English and French seaside resorts. In 1884, he sailed around Cape Horn from Liverpool on the Robert Kerr on a doomed voyage, arriving in Burrard Inlet in southwestern British Columbia in September 1885, a year after setting sail, after the boat's captain died and it ran aground. He began bathing at a beach, English Bay, every day, regardless of whatever he did. In all, his jobs were bottom drawer. He ran the first shoeshine stand, was a porter and a bartender. Joe's legend began because of his heroic actions in the disastrous fire which completely destroyed the recently incorporated city of Vancouver on June 13, 1886. He rescued a number of people, including the wife of a prominent person, and saved people's possessions by taking them out to sea. Making his home at English Bay, he lived in a tent on the beach during the milder months of the year. After the start of the 20th century, Vancouver was seeking to improve its housing, and he moved into a cottage on the shore side. At a later date, when the city tried to push down his house, the public protested, and it was moved to a new location on the other side of the street. But the legend that is Joe Fortes grew from his love and exploits at sea. He became the self-appointed, unpaid guard at the bay while supporting himself by working odd jobs. He devoted all of his free time to teaching children to swim and to patrolling the beach. He became a hero, saving 29 lives, 200 unofficially in his years in Vancouver, as swimming was a new thing to white folk and teaching thousands to swim. If, as reported, he encouraged the children saying, "Kick your feet, child, kick your feet," he was definitely a Bajan. In 1900, the city appointed him its first official lifeguard at $90 a month. referred to respectfully and lovingly as Old Black Joe or English Bay Joe, the stocky Barbadian was first honored in 1910 for his many years of service to the public by the city, and he was presented with a gold watch, a check, and an illuminated address. So highly regarded was Joe that he was later made a special constable and given a gun and a badge. Joe Fortes died on February 4th, 1922, at Vancouver General Hospital from a paralytic stroke about 3 weeks after being admitted for pneumonia. Vancouver held the biggest ever funeral procession for him. It amounted to a state funeral, with all top officials attending, a mounted escort, and schools pausing for 5 minutes silence, after which followed a lesson from teachers about self-sacrifice and devotion to duty. He was buried in Mountain View Cemetery. A flat stone marks his grave, simply inscribed, Joe. As in life, after death, there have been many honors. These include the Joe Fortes Memorial Drinking Fountain, built by contributions from children he taught to swim, dedicated in June 1927. The inscription says, "Little children loved him." The Joe Fortes branch of the Vancouver Public Library. It was dedicated on May 20th, 1976. The Joe Fortes Seafood and Chop House Restaurant opened in 1985, 100 years after his arrival in Vancouver. Citizen of the Century in 1986, Vancouver's centennial year by the Vancouver Historical Society. The National Film Board of Canada animated short film Joe in 2002. The 2013 Canada Post postage stamp. The stamps released on February 1st, 2013, marked the 150th anniversary of Joe's birth and was issued to celebrate Black History Month. He is also included in schools' textbooks. The honors confirm that Joe holds a special place in Vancouver's history. The many pictures for that time also confirm his popularity, but they only tell part of the story, one we will never truly know. You must be left wondering, like me, how one of only 2 Black men in Vancouver at that time could so captivate a province that all these years later, he still resonates. How could a flat broke sailor from Barbados arrive in Vancouver in 1885, remain among the poorest, and still be loved over 100 years later? How did this most modest of men so influence the population that, in their thousands and without prompting, they rallied to his defense whenever their support was needed? It's tough to be a person of color now. Imagine how it was in 1887. Yet Joe superseded all barriers to become the most loved person in his time. Almost every report, and he was the celebrity of the day, with every move recorded, described him as friend. Since he lived in a tent and only left $228.66 when he died, Joe's place in the hearts of the people of Vancouver probably rested in a sublime personality, a unique combination of kindness, love, and modesty that has not been seen since. Determination should not be underestimated, and of course, saving lives. Maybe the reveal lies in these two facts. Fortes owned only one book, The Imitation of Christ by Thomas Kempis, and that Seraphim, his middle name, denotes the highest form of celestial hierarchy according to Christian teaching. Ordinary Joe, a Black hero, and one for the history books.
In 1986, on the 100th anniversary of Vancouver's founding, the Vancouver Historical Society convened to determine who had been the Vancouverite of the century. You may be surprised to learn that rather than choosing a politician, businessman, or explorer, they instead chose a Caribbean bartender, lifeguard, and swim teacher. Seraphim Joe Fortes was an unlikely hero, a gentle giant who came to represent to Vancouverites the values of service, kindness, and modesty. His story is all the more remarkable because he was a black man in an overwhelmingly white city in a time when overt racism was the norm. And today, February 9th, is his birthday. During the 34 years he spent as a lifeguard on the beaches of English Bay, he saved countless lives, taught thousands of children to swim, and inspired the city with his magnetic personality. Joe's heartwarming story reminds us of a smaller and friendlier Vancouver of a bygone era. Joe was born in Trinidad around 1865, but left home as a young man, traveling first to Liverpool and then, in 1885, to Vancouver on the ship the Robert Kerr. His first recorded act of heroism came less than a year later. Just weeks after the city was officially founded, the Great Fire of Vancouver destroyed, well, pretty much the entire city. At the time, Joe was working as a shoeblack at the Sunnyside Hotel, just off Maple Tree Square. Seeing the flames roaring down Water Street, he leapt into action, running into a burning building and pulling out the wife and 8-year-old son of the local member of parliament, saving their lives. After the fire, the city rebuilt, pretty much overnight, and Joe became a bartender at the Bodega Saloon. In no time, he was the most popular person in town. One day, when Joe was feeling unwell, the Daily News advertiser thought it was newsworthy enough to write a story about it.
Men went about with a sad look on their faces. Dogs wore a dejected air, and even the rats seemed to feel the general depression. The cause of the universal sadness was the fact that Mr. Joe Fortes was suffering from indisposition. He looked quite pale as he sat in a chair and mused on the mutability of human affairs. All the leading physicians were in attendance, and hourly bulletins were issued.
Thankfully, Joe quickly recovered. In 1887, Joe was rowing along the densely forested coastline between Vancouver and Jerry's Cove, which is now Jericho Beach. He came across the perfect beach for swimming. It had white, sandy shores and easy, rolling surf. He rowed back to the city, determined to find a trail to this beach. It might be hard to imagine today, but back then, the entire West End was still old-growth forest, and there was no obvious land access to this beach. There was one trail, though, long used by the Squamish people, and Joe soon found it and then spread word of his new swimming hole. The beach, originally known by the Squamish people as Ailshun, or Good Footing, soon quickly became known as Joe's Beach. Today, it goes by a name you might find familiar. It's called English Bay. Joe devoted his free time to making the beach a safe and peaceful place. As his beach's popularity grew, he successfully convinced the mayor to build a proper road through the forest. The mayor felt he owed it to Joe. After all, the woman and her son who Joe had saved in the Great Fire, they were the mayor's in-laws. The wooden plank trail they built to the beach is now called Denman Street. Joe became the unofficial lifeguard, teaching children to swim in all his spare hours. Swimming as an activity was a fairly new concept to Europeans, and was just really catching on for the first time amongst white Canadians, though Indigenous people had been swimming for centuries. In fact, they introduced the freestyle stroke to shock and scandalize British people who only knew of an awkward kind of breaststroke. For obvious reasons, many of these swimmers needed rescuing. Thankfully, Joe, who was an accomplished swimmer, was there to save them. He is officially credited with saving 29 lives, but the actual number is estimated to be well over 100. Joe's reassuring presence on the beach became an iconic part of Vancouver's identity in those days. In 1900, a petition demanded that Joe be instated as the official lifeguard, complete with title and salary. Thousands of supportive Vancouverites signed their name, and the motion was approved. Joe was appointed swim instructor, lifeguard, and special constable of English Bay, with a salary of $80 a month. He retired from bartending and moved into a little cottage that once stood just above the beach, so he could keep an eye on the young swimmers. It wasn't all smooth sailing. Every good story needs a villain, and in this story that's Thomas Nealance, Vancouver's puritanical, cost-cutting mayor from 1902 to 1903. He worked furiously to fire Joe and introduced a motion to the Parks Board abolishing his lifeguard position. The move provoked public outrage. Over 2,000 people, including many of the city's most prominent citizens, came out to support Joe. Nealance was chastised and forced to back down. By 1910, many of the children Joe had taught to swim and whose lives he had saved had now grown up, and many had become prominent in Vancouver's tight-knit society. With genuine gratitude, a ceremony was held at the Vancouver Board of Trade to present Joe with a gold watch and $472 raised by the community. That's over $10,000 in today's money. One Vancouverite who'd moved to California wired in a $10 contribution with a telegram that read, "If this was my last $10, Joe would have half of it." In 1919, while rescuing the crew of a shipwrecked Japanese fishing boat, Joe caught a cold. He never fully recovered. He developed pneumonia and was forced to give up lifeguarding. Joe died on February 4th, 1922, at the age of 57.
I had it before you touched
There was
it.
no question that Joe would be afforded the extremely rare honor of a civic funeral. Such was the esteem in which he was held. His casket was borne through the city, led by a mounted police honor guard, and followed by Vancouver's mayor and council, many of whom he had taught to swim. Trailing behind his hearse was the little lifeboat, which he had used to save so many lives. As the procession neared Joe's beach, the crowd swelled, and soon tens of thousands of people lined the streets to bid Joe farewell. It remains the largest funeral in Vancouver's history. The Vancouver Daily Mail described the day.
In every school of Greater Vancouver, thousands of children stood with bowed heads in tribute to a parted friend, and the thoughts of many a businessman were mellowed by the realization of a great loss. Great financiers, worthy statesmen, and captains of industry have been honored in the past by public demonstration and pompous funeral, but seldom by the universal and generally heartfelt tribute of affection which marked the laying to rest this morning of Vancouver's Joe.
His tombstone at Mount View Cemetery simply said Joe, because everyone knew who he was. That other plaque was added later on. After growing up in Vancouver, it's hard to imagine a story like this that has any kind of modern parallel. How one person can inspire so much love and affection across the whole community and leave such a lasting impact that he was voted Vancouverite of the Century over 60 years after his death. It's a truly remarkable story. Thanks for watching this historical video from On the Spot. If you want to learn more about Joe, you can download the On the Spot app and take the Joe Fortes walking tour in English Bay. And if you enjoyed this video, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Are you Joe Fortis?
Yes, I am Joe Fortes. That's who I am.
Hey, Joe! I heard your mama calls you Seraphim. Seraphim means angel.
Yes, that is so. But best you children call me Joe. I love to swim in English Bay. I've always loved the sea. Do all you children know how to swim? Well, come along with me.
Stay close to Joe. You'll be all right. Stay close to Joe. He'll hold you tight.
Teach me, Joe.
Bartley! 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 No child of mine will ever swim with a man who looks like that.
Hey, Joe, look at me.
It's disgraceful that he's even here. The man's not white. He's black. Joe's the lifeguard for the children.
And special constable for the speech.
You need never fear when Joe is near. He keep us all in reach.
Grandma, he is our Joe. He saves our lives. He makes us brave. We learn to dive. Dive? Watch me, Joe.
Get out now, Missy. That's the way. Keep your head up. Don't be afraid. Jump. Jump off that raft with all your might. You can't be staying there tonight.
Hey, Joe.
Joe, he's a very kind man. He follow his heart.
He's from the West Indies. Was a sailor to start.
Bedtime in Liverpool. Taught swimming there.
Won a long distance race. Got a medal from the mayor.
Sailed round to Canada. Shipwrecked on the way.
It was fate that Vancouver was the place he would stay.
Joe settled in our city, bartended a saloon.
Swam in English Bay every Wednesday afternoon. Fire on the waterfront of Vancouver, caught in flames!
Joe Fortes, lifesaver, earned a hero's name.
It was after the fire that Joe adopted the speech. Never paid for his work. Just believed he must teach.
At first, it was mostly rocks, sand, and trees. Now everybody swims with Joe in the sea.
There's nothing worse than a wasted life. That's why I love to teach all you little children to just keep kicking your feet.
Help! Help!
Make way! Make way! Make way! Make way! No more swimming when your skin turns blue. Sit right down. Tie up those shoes. Run home quick for a hot, hot drink. If you stay in the water, you'll be sure to sink. Ma'am.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you.
Watch me, Joe. My towel. How long can you hold your breath?
Summers passed. Joe saved lives. Thousands learned to swim. Vancouver finally saw the light and rewarded him. For Joe, a rose-covered cottage with a view of his favorite bay And they paid him to work at the job he loved best. Forever. Till the end of his days.
I'm sure that you would agree with me that that is indeed a remarkable story. The kind of history, black or white, that you hardly ever come across. Really inspirational. And we can always all take heart from that. It doesn't matter who you are. It's not about the job you have, the degrees or whatever. We all can make a difference in the world. We are gonna move on swiftly to our next personality. This is a feature on the Fords. The Fords, of course, Barbadian, who had a massive impact in Ethiopia, but also in Harlem, among the Jewish community, and in business. This session will be brought to you by Helen Walker after the video. Do you know the popular anthem of Ethiopia? Do you know that a Barbadian is regarded as the first black rabbi, Jewish rabbi in America? Have you ever heard about the Fords? You're going to hear about them tonight as we continue our celebration of Black History Month. The Fords who have made an indelible mark in Ethiopia.
Arnold and Mignon Ennis Ford, the Renaissance couple of Ethiopia. Arnold J. Ford and his wife Mignon Ennis Ford are arguably the most influential Black Barbadian couple in Black history, prominent in the Garveyite movement, the Black Jewish community in Harlem, and especially in Ethiopia, where Mignon was a game changer. A Renaissance duo, they have left marks in business, religion, music, and education, some of which remains to this day and will likely live on. Among them are the enduring and inspiring the universal Ethiopian anthem written by Ford and the Mignon Ennis School developed by his wife. Theirs is also a love story, one driven by a shared vision of a new life in a foreign land and determination by Mrs. Ford to see it through after her husband died a few years after they married in Ethiopia. Arnold Ford was born in Bridgetown, Barbados on April 23, 1877. His parents, Edward Ford and Elizabeth Brathwaite, were both originally from Africa. Ford's father was from Nigeria and worked as a police officer and sometime preacher. His mother had immigrated from Sierra Leone. Ford's early education centered on music, including lessons on the harp, the violin, and the bass. By age 20, he was an accomplished musician. He enlisted in the British Royal Navy in 1899 and was assigned to the music corps, which took him to ports throughout the world, including Africa. After the Navy, he worked briefly as a clerk in Bermuda. And then he claimed as a public works administrator in Liberia, where freed American slaves had begun to settle in 1821. Also a linguist, Ford's travels eventually took him to the United States, and his passion for music led him in 1910 to the vibrant and burgeoning music scene in New York City's Harlem neighborhood. Within 2 years, he was appearing with an early jazz group at the Clef Club, an influential gathering place for Harlem musicians. It was during this period that he married Olive Nurse, with whom he had 2 children before they divorced in 1924. A series of meetings with Jamaican-born Black nationalist Marcus Garvey would change his life and inspire Ford to embrace Judaism openly. He was introduced to Ethiopian Jews, which moved him to recall his childhood teachings that Black people were directly related to the Jewish people. Ford became employed by Garvey's United Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, responsible for orchestrating much of the pageantry of Garvey's highly attractive ceremonies. As its music director, he created several songs, including co-authoring the lyrics of the Universal Ethiopian Anthem with Benjamin E. Burrell, to which he added the music. Ford's contributions to the UNIA were not limited to musical matters. He and E.L. Gaines wrote the Handbook of Rules and Regulations for the African Legion, which was modeled after the Zionist Jewish Legion, and developed guidelines for the Black 3 Cross nurses. He served on committees, spoke at rallies, and was elected one of the delegates representing the 35,000 members of the New York chapter to the first International Convention of Negro Peoples of the World, held in 1920 at Madison Square Garden. There, the governing body adopted the red, black, and green flag as its national ensign and Ford's song Ethiopia became the universal Ethiopian anthem, which the UNIA Constitution required be sung at every gathering. During that same year, Ford published the Universal Ethiopian Hymnal. It includes the line in Psalm 68 that Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hand to God, which became the popular slogan of the organization. At the 1922 convention, Ford opened the proceedings for the session devoted to the politics and future of the West Indian Negro, and he represented the advocates of Judaism on a 5-person ad hoc committee formed to investigate the future religion of the Negro. Following Garvey's arrest in 1923, the UNIA lost much of its internal cohesion. Ford refused to testify against Garvey at trial, but in 1925, he brought separate lawsuits against Garvey and the UNIA for failing to pay him royalties from the sale of recordings and sheet music. And in 1926, the judge ruled in Ford's favor. Yet, despite his personal and business differences with the organization, Ford remained active in the UNIA as a rabbi, giving invocations and benedictions. Ford then worked with Mordecai Herman and the Moorish Zionist Temple until they had an altercation over the theological and financial issues. He then opened Beth B'nai Israel at a storefront. As Ford grew in the faith and expanded his membership, the Black synagogue was renamed Beth B'nai Abraham. The white Jews who frequented the area observed Ford's practices and even praised his authenticity, but fell short of recognizing Ford as a rabbi. But he is delivered to be the first Black rabbi in the United States. While that has been debated, there is no doubt that Rabbi Ford was a pioneering figure in America's Black Judaism movement, known for its exhaustive study of the Torah, the Talmud, and the Hebrew language. Ford created a business venture in 1928 via the synagogue that focused on real estate and other ventures called the B'nai Abraham Progressive Corporation. With issued shares, he purchased 2 buildings, operating a religious and vocational school in one and an apartment house in the other. But the realities of the Great Depression would prove to be its undoing, and the business went bankrupt in 1930. Once again, it seemed that Ford's dream of building a Black community with cultural integrity, economic viability, and political virility was dashed. But one of the ashes of this disappointment, he mustered the resolve to make a final attempt in Ethiopia. Mignon Lorraine Innes was among the first group traveling from New York City and led by Rabbi Ford, the by then internationally known scholar and political advocate for the liberation of oppressed peoples throughout the world. Born on 19th November 1905 in Barbados, in the early 20s, she had immigrated to New York City, where she studied business administration at the Brathwaite School of Business. It was there that she met a group of Ethiopian dignitaries who were recruiting skilled African Americans to help in Ethiopia's development. Soon after they arrived in Ethiopia, she married Ford. He had arrived in Ethiopia with a small musical contingent in time to perform during the coronation festivities for Haile Selassie. Ford managed to secure 800 acres of land on which to begin his colony, and approximately 100 individuals came to help him develop it. But by 1935, the Black Jewish experiment with Ethiopian Zionism was on the verge of collapse. A.J. Ford died in 1935 and is buried in Ethiopia. But Mignon, in what can only be termed a love pact, remained in Ethiopia to continue the work started by her husband. After Ethiopia regained her independence in 1941, Mrs. Ford and her godmother, Alberta Thomas, founded the first co-educational boarding school in the country, the Bay Oriole School. The school was later named the Princess Zenebi Rock School in memory of the late daughter of Emperor Haile Selassie. She designed and successfully implemented a well-rounded curriculum with a strong emphasis on the development of the students' African identities and Ethiopia's proper place in African and world history. Mignon Ennis Ford also co-founded and served on the board of directors of several Ethiopian organizations. She was the recipient of numerous awards, including the Edward Wilmot Blyden Award for Education Excellence in African Development from the African Heritage Studies Association. She was later elected as an elder to the AHSA Board of Directors. She also received an award from the Society of Ethiopian Established in Diaspora for Excellence in African Education. Regarded highly as a mother and teacher, she was addressed as Teacher Tilikwa, great teacher, within the Ethiopian community. Mignon Lorraine Ennis Ford died on January 15th, 1995 at the Howard University Hospital in Washington, D.C. She was buried in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, with her husband. The inscription on her tomb reads, "O Ethiopia, to thee she was called by duty. With thee she toiled for liberty. With thine she cast her dignity, her destiny. In thee she rests with dignity." The Fords had two sons. Joseph was a cultural anthropologist, a graduate from Columbia University. Joseph died in 2001. Abayi, a well-known scholar of media and communication, who worked at Howard University and Addis Ababa University, founded the Mignon Lorraine Ennis Ford Foundation to pursue the work of his mother. A talented musician like his father, he died in 2019. Their works, too, are part of the immense legacy of the Barbadian Fords.
It was the roaring 20s. The euphoria that heralded in at the turn of the 20th century had not yet abated. This was the decade that stamped the template of that century. America was the singular giant global magnet, drawing the dreamers, the restless, the frustrated, and the unsettled to its teeming shores. Most would be welcome and find respite, wealth, and pleasure on these shores. But there were those who came to learn that this bastion of democracy, this land of the free, was to betray them. For them, there was to be no respite, no dignity, no liberty. The freedom they sought was to be denied them by a racist philosophy of sophisticated dehumanization implemented by cruel and inhuman means. Among the teeming masses, however, were visionaries of African descent who would remain undaunted, warriors who were to valiantly engage the enemy in the battlefield of ideas for justice, liberty, and human dignity. Langston Hughes, Richard Wright, Paul Robeson, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, Arnold Hosea Ford, and many more made their marks on the pages of history for their memorable stand against rampant racism and all other forms of human oppression. On the other side of the globe, Africa was reeling under the heels of colonialism. The singular beacon of hope emitting from Ethiopia, the last ancient and fiercely independent nation of Africa, pierced the blinding fog across the Atlantic to capture the undaunted spirit of the sons and daughters of Africa's diaspora. Thereafter, it was only natural that a bridge spanning the Atlantic began to form between the kindred spirits of the two peoples. Emperor Haile Selassie, having set a new course for the new century, was then reaching out for technical assistance from the industrialized world. To that end, he sent several delegations of learned high officials to the United States to recruit skilled professionals from the talent pool of the black diaspora. His efforts were not to be in vain. Though small in number, a complement of committed visionaries, led by Rabbi Ford, answered the call in 1931 and immigrated to their new home in Ethiopia. Mignon Lorraine Ennis, along with her godmother Alberta Thomas, were among them. Not long after her arrival in Addis Ababa, Mignon was married to Rabbi Ford and bore him 2 sons. On the eve of the 1936 fascist Italian invasion, succumbing to the pressures of impending fascist aggression, Rabbi Ford passed away, leaving Mignon to raise their 2 sons. The drums of war, however, did not frighten Mrs. Ford and her godmother Alberta Thomas into fleeing the country for their safety. At great peril to the family, they chose instead to stay and contribute to the resistance. They were both honoring the solemn oath given to Rabbi Ford on his deathbed. "We came to Ethiopia to become Ethiopians, and we shall survive or perish as Ethiopians." By 1941, the occupation had failed. The fascists were expelled from Ethiopia. The rebuilding of Ethiopia was now underway in earnest. Mrs. Ford and Miss Thomas were there, ready, able, and willing to do their part in meeting the challenges of rebuilding a nation. In 1941, with renewed hope and a profound sense of mission, Mrs. Ford and Miss Thomas founded the very first co-educational boarding school in Ethiopia and named it Beit Urael, the House of Light. For the first time, girls and boys would study together. Unfortunately, Alberta Thomas, shown on the bottom left, passed away shortly afterward, and Miss Jane Amelia Foster took up where she left off. For many years, until her death in 1954, Jane Amelia Foster was to be the right hand of her dear friend Mignon Ford. Soon the school outgrew its small premises. Fortunately, hearing of the school's commendable work, Emperor Haile Selassie granted use of a larger facility elsewhere and asked that the name be changed to the Princess Zennework School, in memory of his youngest daughter, who met with an untimely death. The school kept growing in leaps and bounds, and it was not long before it was moved to its present location, with the buildings and grounds graciously donated to the cause by Her Imperial Majesty Empress Menen. In the ensuing years, the school became an unprecedented veritable beehive of educational activity. It quickly and efficiently expanded from kindergarten and elementary school status to include a first-rate secondary school division. Offering a wide range of academic subjects and extracurricular activities, the school grew in popularity and eventually captured the imagination and respect of a grateful nation. Graduates of the Princess Zenderburg School consistently registered at the top percentile of the national average in all academic subjects, extracurricular activities, and all varsity sports competition. Students of PZDES, as it was popularly called, became trendsetters and role models. Mrs. Ford never let up. She championed the fine arts and athletics, and for the first time in Ethiopian history, against strong cultural objections and formidable odds, introduced varsity sports, gymnastics, and acrobatics for girls. Mrs. Ford is also credited for reviving the Ethiopian Boy Scouts as Troop Number 1, and for founding the Ethiopian Girl Guides, also as Troop Number 1. As a private school, there was a constant need to generate more and more funds to operate the school efficiently. Mrs. Ford ingeniously met this challenge by holding musical concerts and putting on theatrical dramas and comedies that she authored and directed. This home for the wonderful and memorable family continued to thrive until the unfortunate events that brought on the revolution of 1974 and the ensuing military dictatorship that cast aside Mrs. Ford's precious dreams and dimmed the lights of old PZDES. For nearly 2 decades afterwards, the school was grossly mismanaged, fell into complete disrepair, and as a consequence, slipped to the lowest of standards in all respects. When Mrs. Ford passed away in 1995, the parents, teachers, and children from the school, bearing the Princess Zenderburg School banner, marched to her house to pay their condolence to the family. On that occasion, they sought approval from the Ford family to rename the school after its founder. Honored by the request, the family, together with former students and friends, established the Mignon Lorraine Ennis Ford Memorial Foundation as a non-profit organization to rescue the school, help restore it to its former level, and recover the remarkable legacy of bridge building across the Atlantic. All of the parts are now in place. The history, the school, the children, and the cause. All that is missing is your generous presence in advancing this worthy endeavor. With the globalization phenomena in full swing, this project is as much yours as it is ours. Do join us.
Ethiopia, thou land of our fathers, thou land where the gods love to be. A storm cloud at night suddenly gathers, our armies come rushing to thee. We must in the fight be victorious, when swords are thrust outward to gleam. For us will the victory be glorious, when led by the red, black, and green. Advance, advance to victory, let Africa be free. Advance to meet the foe, advance to meet the foe, with the might of the red, the black, and the green, with the might of the red, the black, and the green. O Jehovah, thou God of the ages, grant unto our sons that need the wisdom thou gave to thy sages when Israel was sore in need. Thy voice to the dim past has spoken, Ethiopia shall stretch forth her hand. By thee shall all fetters be broken, and heaven bless our dear motherland. Advance, advance to victory, let Africa be free. Advance to meet the foe, advance to meet the foe, with the might of the red, the black and the green, with the might of the red, the black and the
Thank you, Helen, for that long read, but I'm sure that there's so much more that we could say about the Fords. What a remarkable couple. I can't imagine what was like for people to go in the distance land in those times. Even in these times, I don't want to go in distant lands, not too far away from the ones I know for sure. We are gonna continue with a tribute to Barbadian Ken Farnham, which will be presented after the video by Miguel Edgel. This is a very interesting story. As I would have said earlier, I do confess I had not a clue who he was. And I like to think that I know a bit about Barbadian history and history makers. And this was a true legend right underneath our noses. And if it wasn't for the unfortunate passing, his unfortunate passing last year due to COVID complications, we probably would not have known about this remarkable person. We present Ken Farnham. It is said that before Gary Sobers, there was Ken Farnham. You know, Gary Sobers was the greatest. Ken Farnham? Yes, Ken Farnham. The first Barbadian at the Olympics, and a folk hero among Barbadians. A man who dominated the sport of riding in New York. A man whose story we should know, and today we share. Ken Farnham, an outstanding Barbadian and a dominant cyclist.
Hello, I'm Peter Joffrey Nye, author of Hearts of Lions, The History of American Bicycle Racing. I include Ken Farnham in the book. He grew up on the Caribbean island of Barbados, where he began racing at age 10. He developed in pack racing over short distances on circuits laid out on the grass of flat cricket fields. He grew to a little over 6 feet tall, a trim and muscular 180 pounds. Farnham was 22 in 1952 when he competed in Jamaica's track cycling team in the Helsinki Olympics. He raced in the match sprints. As Barbados' first Olympian, Farnham became a folk hero as a classy rider handling his bike with expertise in crowded packs. He won many races against white guys. In 1957, he won the Amateur Bicycle League of America New York State Championship.
Ken Farnham, cycling champion. Every Barbadian of a certain age still speaks with reverence about Ken Farnham and is in awe of him. The mention of his name evokes the kind of emotion and spontaneous pride reserved for idols, which is unsurprising because he was exactly that, the idol for a generation of Barbadians who followed his every success at home and abroad. And successes, there were many of them. Before the heyday of cricket and the exploits of the now right excellent Gary Sobers and his band of warriors, there was Kenneth Aubrey, Ken Farnham, and cycling. Farnham dominated the sport, but more than that, he brought something special, different. It was not just the physique. He had that panache that turned a sport from something a segment of the population likes into a countrywide cheering squad. He was the game changer, like Ali or Michael or Tiger. The difference? Farnham remained quiet and modest, and cycling outside the Tour de France and sprint cycling have not come anywhere to matching the development of other sports despite being one of the 5 disciplines at the Olympics since inception. Born on 18th January 1931, Farnham began racing at age 10 while still at school. He became an A-class champion, developing his skill in pack races on circuits laid out on cricket fields. A sprint cyclist, he grew to a little over 6 feet tall and a trim 180 pounds. Tactical, savvy, and a capacity for powering big gears earned him victories in Barbados and in venues around the Caribbean, including Jamaica and Trinidad and Guyana. Virtually unbeaten in sprint events, he collected 8 West Indies sprint titles, dominating the local and regional cycling scene. The newspaper headlines captured the sporting hero of the day. As such, Farnham wins international championship at 2-day meet. Another one read, Farnham rides unbeaten. And that was the report for a Whit Monday event in which he won the half-mile, 2-mile, and 9-mile events, setting 2 records before a mammoth crowd. Another one read, Farnham wins only open event, overcomes heavy track to outstay Belleisle. That was about a 6-mile event in Guyana. Another one read, Ken Farnham rides unbeaten in annual interclub sports. In 1956, the Barbados cycling community wanted Farnham to compete at the Olympic Games, but Barbados had no Olympic committee and was not a member of the International Olympic Committee, known as the IOC. An avenue was discovered that allowed him to compete as a member of the Jamaica team. The trip was made possible through the public-supported Farnham to Finley Fund and support from the government. So at age 21, young Farnham found himself in Helsinki at the 1956 Olympic Games. He vividly recalled that on arrival in Helsinki, Finland, he was awed by the sight of a cycling velodrome for the very first time, far less never having had the opportunity to ride on one before. His bicycle being damaged while training in a stopover in Britain, he was lucky to borrow a pair of pedals from the British cycling team. Accustomed to riding on a flat surface, the bank velodrome surface proved a challenge. He competed in the 1,000-meter time trial, an Olympic event that at the time had not been introduced to the Caribbean. He placed 20th out of 38 riders. He also competed in his pet event, a match sprint, placing 21st out of 33 riders. The fact that he had never ridden in that environment before won him praise from the International Olympic Cycling Fraternity. After the Olympics, the former Combamarian who worked at the communications company Cable and Wireless moved to New York City, where he worked in communications, but he continued riding and racing. It was a different country, but the same Farnham dominance. A headline in a New York newspaper written by Henry Isola announced the arrival of the conquering cyclist thus: Subert dethroned at Flushing Meadows. Farnham captures state bike title. Isola, calling Farnham the Negro Ace, said that he covered himself in glory in an upset win in the New York State Bicycle Racing Championships. At the time, Farnham, who arrived in New York in May of 1955, had only been in the country 2 months and rode on a borrowed bike. In all, Farnham won 3 consecutive New York State Cycling Championships from 1955 to 57. He was the first cyclist of color to win the major events in the United States since Major Taylor at the turn of the 20th century, and competed against and inspired Herbie Francis, the first African American to make a U.S. Olympic cycling team. At the time, cycling was one of the biggest sports in the USA, with thousands, including all kinds of celebrities, attending 6-day bicycle races. Because of the sport's popularity, Farnham's exploit in a sport with few black participants generated pandemonium and pride, especially among the black community in New York. As in Barbados, the community followed his every move, his every race, celebrating his victories with quiet pride. He definitely was a folk hero, said Butch Martin, a 2-time Olympian and Hall of Famer. If you think of the sport in the 1950s, kicking some white guy's ass was a big deal. Farnham could do that. He had the big following. He was on course to go to the 1960 Olympics, but while competing in the U.S. National Championships, he took a nasty spill in the very first race, in which was characterized as criminal intent by a competitor. Thereafter, Farnham, who continued to work in communications, retired from the sport and focused his energies on his family, bringing up 2 children, Ken Jr. and Judy, with his wife Judith, whom he married on October 20th, 1954. In 2012, He was a featured guest in Barbados at the Olympic Association's 50th anniversary celebration, and he donated a collection of paraphernalia to the organization. He is featured in a book, The Hearts of Lions, The History of American Bicycle Racing by Peter Neri, a writer and board member of the U.S. Cycling Hall of Fame. In April last year, Ken Farnham, Barbados' first Olympian, died from complications brought on by COVID-19 on April 4th at age 89. A celebration of life mass of remembrance was held on January 18th at Our Lady of Assumption St. Mary's Star of the Sea in the Bronx. He is survived by wife Judith, son Ken Jr., daughter Judy, and two sisters, Colleen and Anne, in Barbados, as well as nieces and nephews. A story probably pinpoints Ken Farnham's status as a cycling icon and folk hero of the 1940s, 50s, and early 60s, and the man all agreed was the best of his time. On his way to the Helsinki Games, Farnham stopped off in England. He was given the honor of meeting the Queen, who sent a Rolls-Royce for him. In 1956, that was a huge deal. It certainly underscored the importance of and impact of Ken Farnham, the Barbadian from Peterkin, Bank Hall, St. Michael. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miguel. And I get the applause, well deserved, and I salute the Farnham family, his widow, who I see on, and his daughter. I believe that there are other family members on, and yes, Mom, I see you shaking. It was an honor and privilege to be at the remembrance service. We're gonna hear something else on Mr. Farnham a little later in the program. But this story underscores why it's important to know our history, and important to highlight those who have really changed their period for others to follow. And Ken Farnham definitely made a difference for so many cyclists, not only in Barbados, but in New York. We shall move on to our next personalities. And I say personalities, we're gonna feature two of them tonight. I think if we had to speak about this family, it will take a whole day. We come now to the Barclays, another family that impacted a foreign country, Liberia. You will love this story. Liberia, regarded as the first free nation in Africa. We know very well what that means. No need to discuss that now. Of course, we know Africa was free long before it is claimed it was free. Back to the story, Liberia, a country that remembers the Barclays. And who are the Barclays? A family from Barbados. And out of that family, two Barclays became presidents of Liberia. You might have heard snippets of this story before. Today, we give you a fuller picture of Edwin and Arthur Barclay, presidents of Liberia with Barbadian heritage.
The Barclays and their indelible impact on Liberia. It is doubtful that any Barbadian family of any color has had the indelible impact on a country as the Barclays. From the late 19th century to the middle of the 20th century, the Barclay name was ubiquitous in Liberia, and the family dominated government from the beginning of the 1900s. The main scions were Arthur and Edwin Barclay, both of whom became presidents. But the Barclay legacy includes 4 secretaries of state, a chief judge, 2 associate judges, and numerous other officials in government and the top professions. Strange enough, probably the most lasting legacy attached to the Barclay name is not political in the strict sense at all. Rather, it is artistic. The Lone Star Forever, a patriotic song written by Edwin when he was just 19. Today, this song is as popular as ever, sung at official and other functions, and sampled and mixed by the top Liberian musicians and singers. While they set out from Barbados, one imagines for a better life, in May 1865, it is doubtful that Anthony and Sarah Ann Barclay contemplated that their son and family would be instrumental at the core of the development of Liberia. They were a part of a group of 346 Barbadians who journeyed to the designated Free State as part of a Pan-African American movement. The Barclays and their children settled in Monrovia, although most Barbadians formed the town of Cozaerville. Arthur Barclay was the 10th of the Barclay children, born in Bridgetown on July 31st, 1854. He was homeschooled by his sister, Antoinette Hope Barclay, before graduating from the Collegiate Department of Liberia with a bachelor's in 1873. He reportedly sold salt on the streets of Monrovia before joining the staff of his alma mater, becoming principal of the preparatory department in 1877, and then professor of mathematics and languages. He was also a member of the Board of Trustees and sometimes acting president. Between semesters, he worked as chief clerk at the House of Representatives while studying law. He was also appointed private secretary to President Joseph Jenkins Roberts at 20, serving from 1874 to 1877. He admitted to the Montserrado County Bar as an attorney in 1877. He became a counselor at law 3 years later and judge of the Court of Quarterly Sessions and Common Pleas in 1883. Barclay also held the position of sub-treasurer in Montserrado County in 1885 and was elevated to cabinet rank as Postmaster General in 1892, after which he served as Secretary of State under President Joseph J. Cheeseman. In 1896, he was appointed Secretary of the Treasury, a position he held until his election to the presidency in 1903, taking office in January 1904. In the interim, he served on several international missions, including the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago to the 1871 loan amortization talks in 1897, and on diplomatic missions to France and England in 1901. He was also mayor of Monrovia from 1892 to 1902. Writing in the American Colonization Society periodical Liberia in February 1894, Alexander Crummell had effusive praise for Arthur Barclay's intellectual abilities and the Barclay gene pool, writing, "One of the youngest members of a more than ordinary family, for no one could see and converse with the parents and with their sons and daughters, 8 in all, without being struck by both their character and their intelligence. They have risen without any expectations to high positions in church and state as teachers, merchants, lay readers, vestrymen, and statesmen." Mr. Barclay received his education as a boy in the schools of Monrovia. Thence he passed to Liberia College, holding a high position in his classes in both the languages and mathematics. Since his graduation, his acquirements, coupled with his manifest uprightness, had made him a necessary factor in the public affairs of the young nation, and he has held several political positions under the government, always acquitting himself with intelligence and honor. Arthur Barclay was elected president in 1903, serving 3 consecutive terms, extending the term limit from 2 to 4 years. Such was his competence and class that after his presidency, he served as Secretary of the Interior, State, Treasury, and war at various times, regarded as the elder statesman of Liberian politics. On the back of his first election slogan, internal development, he, among other accomplishments, prevented a British coup, settled land disputes with the French and British, and reconciled tribal factions. Known as President of the Open Door Policy, his government also created the Liberian Frontier Force, which later evolved into the Liberian Armed Forces. Charles S. Johnson wrote of the president in the 1930s, stating, "The old man, as he affectionately called, belied his 80 years with a brisk step, firm bearing, active erudition, and incredibly incisive wit. He probably had read every book that came into Liberia and had a retentive and continuous memory. The laws of Liberia, its international problems, the native question, he knew in detail, and discoursed with familiar knowledge on the activities of various African societies, archaeology, legal procedure in England and America, aviation, and President Hoover's government by commissions." One of Arthur Barclay's most important and most challenging assignments in the service of his country came when ex-president, when he was 80 years old, in the semi-retirement on the legal staff of the Firestone Company. The CDB, King government, nominated him in 1929 as the country's representative on the League of Nations Commission inquiry into the existence of slavery and forced labor in the Republic of Liberia. At the time, the chief U.S. diplomat in Monrovia, Clifton Wharton, described the ex-president in a memo to his State Department superiors as the confidential advisor of the present administration, and in times of stress, the government invariably calls upon him. At present, he is practicing law in Monrovia, dean of the Liberian Bar, but best known lawyer in the Republic. He is attorney for the Firestone Plantations Company, great experience on commissions. Arthur's nephew, Edwin, not only followed in his political footsteps, becoming president from 1930 to 1944, but was also a master of the arts, a published poet and musician. Edwin Barclay served as Secretary of State for 10 years from 1920, serving out the term of President Charles King, who resigned along with his vice president in a scandal in 1930 before being elected into his own right in 1931. He brought a steady hand to a turbulent time in Liberia's history, including the war years when the country became a strategic partner with the United States, leading to a visit by President Roosevelt and President Barclay becoming the first Liberian president to visit the United States in May of 1943 as an important event to the survival of his country as to the advancement of Blacks in America. Reports indicate that one of Roosevelt's aides advised him to disinfect the toilet out of fear that African men carried venereal diseases. Barclay went ahead to address a joint meeting of the Congress at the rostrum, becoming the first African guest to do so, and in the process opened the doors for Black correspondents to attend White House and the House Press Gallery, from where they were kept off. Harry McAlpin, the first African-American reporter to attend a U.S. presidential news conference, said this of Barclay's visit. And because Washington was on its best behavior, his presence opened the doors for other Negroes, which had been sealed tightly hitherto, as in the White House and the House Press Gallery, where Negro correspondents were allowed for the first time. Barclay also withstood immense pressure from France, an attempted coup by the Firestone Tire Company, which owned much of Liberia and from which the government had borrowed $5 million, and from the League of Nations starring the British, the United States, and Germany, which threatened recolonization unless numerous suggested reforms were made as Liberia needed money, many of which Edwin Barclay refused to accept. Of importance, Edwin Barclay is credited with opening up the country to development by repealing the Port of Entry Law of 1864, which restricted foreign investment as one of his first decisions. In the early 1930s, concession agreements were signed between the Liberian government and the Dutch, Danish, German, and Polish investors. He was forced during wartime to revoke the agreement with Germany. Arthur Barclay, Liberia's 15th president and the last to be born overseas, died in 1938 at 83, and Edwin, the 18th president, died in 1955 at 73. Other Barclays whose shadows loomed large in Liberia included Arthur's son, Anthony, who served in the Supreme Court, Edwin's father, Ernest J. Barclay, who was a Secretary of State, and Edwin's wife, Euphemia, a distinguished teacher. Edwin and Euphemia were also foster parents of George Padmore, a Liberian ambassador to the United States.
Freedom raised her glowing form on Mount Sorato's verdant height. She sat within a dome of a night, met lowering stars and thunderstorms, the star of liberty, unceasing from the waking morn, its banner shield of golden flame. She lifted it in a proud name and raised her people long forlorn to nobler destiny. The Lone Star forever, the Lone Star forever, oh long may it soar over land and over seas, deserted none ever, uphold it forever, oh shout for the Lone Star banner. Oh, then speeding in a course along the broad Atlantic golden strand, she walked reverberant through the land, a nation's loud triumphant song, the song of liberty, and all Liberians all to spies. Well, she whined the Lone Star flag unfurled, proclaimed to an expected world the birth of Africa's kings and queens. Well, the birth of liberty. The Lone Star forever, the Lone Star forever and ever, long may it soar over land and over seas, deserted none ever, uphold it forever, shout for the Lone Star banner.
One thing for sure, there's Barbadian talent all around from way back. That is an amazing composition there. I want to thank Brianna Taylor, second generation Barbadian, for reading another lengthy presentation, but I'm sure very, very informative. The Barclays dominant personalities. We come now to our last presentation for the evening, which will be presented by UC Skeet. UC Skeet is the head of BTMI, that is our tourism organization in North America. This is, I think, one of the most interesting stories I've ever read. We've heard two conversations before. This is about a Barbadian and a piece of music. Let's get into the Bridge Towers. The name Bridge Towers should tell you something. How did a Barbadian, can you imagine, get to Poland in the early part of the 19th century? And how did a Barbadian, second generation, become acquainted with Beethoven, who is regarded as the greatest composer in the world? More importantly, how did he become intimately involved in what is regarded as one of the hardest but most electrifying pieces of music on violin in the world? You never heard of them, did you? Neither did I until fairly recently. A truly fascinating story of how blacks impact the world. This is true Black history, one unfortunately with a sad ending, but Black history nevertheless, originally from Barbados.
The Bridge Towers, a tragedy of genius, John the Hustler, George the virtuoso violinist. The saying that there's a successful Barbadian everywhere was as true long ago as it is now. The story of this history-making bridge towers is a fascinating piece of incredible success by creating and seizing opportunities that stretches the imagination, considering that it started to play out in the 18th and early 19th century. It starts with John Frederick Bridgetower, born a slave in Barbados, but was not content to end his life as one. The imagination runs riot about how he escaped from Barbados and made his way to Poland, as there is no record how he ended up in the family home of Austro-Hungarian Prince Esterhazy, Joseph Haydn's patron, and learned to speak English, French, German, Italian, and Polish. It is likely he conned his way until he could make a way. Handsome, charming, and a spectacular dresser, Frederick was a natural storyteller with a flair for promotion. He claimed that his father had been an African prince, unofficially adopted by a Dutch sea captain, was promised diamonds and gold dust, and then sold into slavery, surviving a shipwreck in the process. The father married an African woman and wound up in Barbados, where Frederick was born. The name Bridgetower being derived from the island's capital, Bridgetown. He married Mary Ann Sawinski, who was from Poland. Some sources say she was from Germany. Their first son, now known as George Polgreen Bridgetower, was born on August 13, 1778, in eastern Poland, and christened Hieronymus Hippolytus de Augustus. The couple and their son George moved from Poland to Austria, where Frederick, known as the Moor, worked as a page to Prince Nicholas Esterhazy. The music-loving prince maintained his own orchestra at his palace in Eisenstadt, where Haydn was court composer. John was a driving force behind his son's career. The Bridgetowns, as they were then known, lived for a time in Mainz, an important musical center where Maria gave birth to Friedrich T. Bridgetower. He would become an accomplished cellist. By this time, George was already a prodigy. An advertisement discovered in a Frankfurt newspaper promoting a concert by Hieronymus August Bridgetown, the son of a Moor, in April 1786, when the boy would have been just 7, suggests this was his first public performance. It noted that he had already played for Emperor Joseph II. John, leaving his wife and younger child behind, took on tour his eldest son, who billed as a young Negro of the colonies, performed a violin concerto by Ginocchi in the prominent concert spiritual series in Paris in 1789. His talent, as genuine as it is precocious, is one of the best replies one can give to the philosophers who wish to deprive those of his nation and his color the faculty of distinguishing themselves in the arts, said a review in the Mercure de France. After several more concerts in Paris, included one attended by Thomas Jefferson, the Bridgetowers left for England, where the family created a sensation. A figure in the extravagant Turkish robes, which were the fashion of the time, John Bridgetower for a time lived in the high society London as he played up his exoticism until he was banished by the Prince of Wales for immoral behavior in 1791. Everyone wanted to meet this African prince and his prodigy, whose name had now become George. By the fall of 1789, Frederick had arranged for his son to play before King George III and Queen Charlotte at Windsor Castle, as well as the Prince of Wales, later George IV, at the newly built Brighton Pavilion. George induced general astonishment, playing in Bath, according to the Bath Morning Post. At 11, he made his London debut with the Giornavocci concerto between the first 2 parts of Handel's Messiah. He and his father were often at Carlton House, the town residence of the Prince of Wales, who organized regular chamber concerts. On June 2nd, 1790, the Prince sponsored a benefit concert for Bridgetower and another young artist at the Hanover Square Rooms, the premier concert venue for fashionable society. Until then, Frederick had skillfully managed his son's career, but his behavior turned increasingly self-destructive. At a masquerade attended by the Prince, Frederick dressed as a caricature of a black slave advocating for abolition. This was certainly a worthy cause, but the stunt served to alienate the cities and the elites whose favor he had taken pains to cultivate. During a performance of Messiah, he shouted for a repeat of the Hallelujah chorus, and after a struggle was thrown out of the theater. There were reports of excessive drinking and womanizing. Charlotte Papendick, a lady in waiting to Queen Charlotte and a prolific journal keeper, wrote that Frederick gambled away his son's money and treated him so brutally that George sought refuge with the Prince of Wales at Carlton House. Frederick was committed to an asylum before being sent back to Germany by the Prince, who took 12-year-old George under his protection. Meanwhile, the Prince of Wales gave George the opportunity to learn from the finest musicians in London. He studied composition, theory, and piano with Thomas Atwood, and violin with both Francois Hippolyte Barthélémon and Giornavocci. He formed a close relationship with Giovanni Battista Viotti, a violinist and composer whose confident, daring style would influence his own. Over the next decade, Bridgetower would play in nearly 50 public concerts with leading orchestras and musicians, including Haydn and the double bass virtuoso Domenico Dragonetti. He was the first violinist of the Prince of Wales Band. The organist and composer Samuel Wesley wrote that Bridgewater was justly ranked to the very first masters of the violin. After visiting his ailing mother in Dresden, Bridgetower arrived in Vienna in early 1803. He had been invited by Prince Lobkowitz, one of the Beethoven's patrons, to play that composer's quartets. Beethoven and Bridgewater formed an instant bond. The composer, then 32, may have recognized himself in the 24-year-old violinist. Beethoven had been nicknamed the Spaniard for his swarthy complexion, and engravings of the two men showed a marked resemblance. They also had in common abusive fathers with vested interest in their careers, as well as the ability to thrill audiences with their astonishing talents. It is important to know that this meeting between George Bridgetower and Beethoven was 6 months after Beethoven contemplated suicide, confessing his despair over his increasing deafness in the 1802 document known as the Heiligenstadt Testament. In no time, he was carousing in taverns with the charismatic new comrade, George Polgrain Bridgetower. After hearing Bridgetower play, Beethoven not only agreed to participate in one of the celebrated morning concerts by Bridgetower at the Ogarton Pavilion, but at Bridgetower's urging, Beethoven agreed to compose a new violin sonata to be performed by the two of them. Clearly, Bridgetower was in a class above the rest. Beethoven had already started sketching out the first two movements of a violin sonata to accompany a previously discarded finale. He now began to compose with Bridgetower in mind, as the two men stayed up nights drinking and acting like teenagers. Though Bridgetower was described as melancholic, he could also be high-spirited and ribald. He brought out Beethoven's freewheeling body side. The concert had been planned for May 22nd, 1803, but since the sonata wasn't ready, it was postponed until the 24th. At 4:30 that morning, Beethoven was instructed his pupil, Ferdinand Ries, to copy out the first two movements for the violinist. Ries managed only the first, and the piano part was still in sketch form. Beethoven and Bridgetower nonetheless took to the stage for the morning concert, having never rehearsed the piece. Bridgetower was sight reading. A glittering audience assembled for the premiere of the new piece, including the British ambassador Archduke Rudolph, Prince Lichnowsky, Prince Lobkowitz, and other patrons amongst the arts. Beethoven had given Bridgewater an opening solo that began with an explosive declaration, moving into a very sensual dialogue. At one point, Bridgetower surprised Beethoven by imitating and then expanding on a sharp piano cadenza in the first movement. Beethoven looked up from the piano in astonishment. Jumping up, he ran across the stage and embraced Bridgetower, crying, "My dear boy," once more, before running back to the piano and continued playing. After the performance, Beethoven presented Bridgetower his tuning fork and wrote a dedication on the score. Mulatto Sonata, composed for the mulatto Bridgetower, great lunatic and mulatto composer. What was hailed as a triumph of its time and an anticipated ongoing partnership between Bridgetower and Beethoven would come to a sordid end. The tall and good-looking Bridgetower had an eye for the ladies, and I dare say, much like his father. Later, while the two men were drinking, Bridgetower made an off-color remark about a lady Beethoven admired. Beethoven was outraged. He demanded that Bridgetower return the manuscript of the sonata and informed him he was withdrawing the dedication. He would dedicate it instead, he told Bridgetower, to Europe's greatest violin virtuoso who was resident in Paris. The rift between the two men was not healed. Bridgetower left Vienna a week later to visit relatives of his mother in Poland. Bridgetower returned to London and continued to perform, enjoying the patronage of the Prince of Wales. On May 23, 1805, he participated in a concert in the Hanover Rooms, along with his brother, who played a Romberg cello concerto. Their father had also come back to England, where he was arrested and thrown in jail for vagrancy. In 1811, Bridgetower received a master's degree in music from Cambridge University and became a member of the Royal Philharmonic Society. 5 years later, he married Mary Leake, the daughter of a prosperous cotton manufacturer. They had two daughters, one who died in infancy and one lived in Italy, whom he reportedly became estranged from. He and his wife separated in 1824. Little is known about Bridgetower's later years. At some point, he seems to have stopped performing, making his living as a piano teacher in Rome and Paris. Bridgetower died on February 29, 1860. There are conflicting reports about the circumstances of his death. One report is he died in a small house in Peckham, South London, and left his estate of £1,000 to his deceased wife's sister, and his death certificate identifies him as a gentleman. The other is that he died in poverty. The woman who witnessed his death signing her name on his death certificate with a cross. What is definite is that he is buried in Kensal Green Cemetery. The man who inspired what is regarded as one of the most difficult and dramatic pieces of music on violin, and the greatest violin sonata Beethoven composed, George Pullman Bridgetower, was never given his full credit. His association would be lost if not for some dedicated to upholding his brilliance. One of these is poet laureate Rita Dove, whose 2008 work on the Bridgetower and the Sonata Mulattico you will view shortly. A British film, A Mulatto Song, directed by Topher Campbell, was issued in 1996, and there's also a Bridgetower string quartet. If you ever hear a debate about the Kreutzer Sonata or hear the sonata itself, point out immediately that it should really be named after the man who inspired it and played it first, the brilliant, dazzling virtuoso known as the Abyssinian Prince and the Black violinist, and I must add, a native son of the soul, George Bridgetower.
It was that damned sonata. The Kreutzer.
One evening, my husband and I were relaxing with a rented video on Beethoven called Immortal Beloved. It's a biopic about Beethoven. When there came a moment in the movie, just a few seconds.
He and George Bridgetower, the famous virtuoso from Africa, were about to premiere this new Beethoven sonata at Count Razumovsky's that evening.
And I turned to my husband and I said, "What was that?" This is a story about music and what it does to those who make it, whom it enslaves. Yes, slavery of all kinds enters into the mix. Although the skin of our protagonist does not play so great a role in his advancement and subsequent fade from grace as might be imagined. Or does it? Rather, let us say that the racial divide has not yet been invented. His life is an improbable story, where the great composer Franz Haydn actually discovered the child genius in the servants' quarters. He played across Europe, all the way to Paris, to London's royal court, but his greatest triumph came in his early 20s when he traveled to Vienna and inspired Ludwig van Beethoven, arguably the greatest composer of all times, to write his most stunning violin sonata for his new lunatic mulatto, as he called him. But there, George Bridgetower's extraordinary success story ends. All because of a falling out over a girl nobody remembers, nobody knows. Beethoven rededicated the sonata to another violinist, Rudolf Kreutzer, who not only never played the Kreutzer Sonata, but declared it unplayable. Disappearance. A boy and his violin. That's it.
He was born to a drug-addicted woman.
Both small, unremarkable, until one of them moves. The boy lifts his arm, or the violin floats up to kiss his chin.
And then he was placed in foster care.
A man can vanish between the downstroke and the first note sigh, from one word to the next, a wink and a nod.
This woman, she hit him with baseball bats. His legs were broken in 18 places. They said he might not walk.
He'll evaporate under a lady's glance as her smile slides across the room.
And the doctor said that if there was anything that kid needed at the time, it was a mother.
But a boy looks out from the backs of his eyes. A boy stays where you put him, invisible, until you hiccup, and suddenly he's there. I'm off then to anywhere, Vioti's perhaps, or closer the royal boudoir, the arabesques and flickering silks of music, always music. Only music now can save me.
Ready? You either have da 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 dum da 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 dum 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 dum, or you have dum 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 dum. Just like nice little second version, like. I go in to play a competition or an audition. Oftentimes they'll tell me that the jazz auditions are on the other side of the building or like that kind of thing, and you know, you get over it.
All my life, I've been confronted with variations of that old line, what's a nice girl like you doing in a place like this? And early on it was, what are you doing in the orchestra playing cello? What are you doing studying German? Apparently these were not Black-approved activities. The implication being that an African-American poet had no business dabbling in European culture.
And somewhere in America, the next great artist is doodling on their homework. They're out there right now, dwelling in possibility.
Oh, look at that. Unbelievable piece.
We need them to succeed. To disrupt our views.
Yeah.
And to challenge our presumptions.
So it's not only just looking back at history and being able to neatly put it in a box, even if we say, oh, there were so many that were constrained back then. Now, let's roll it forward then, because this is still happening now. Where instead of a Regina Carter or Aaron Dworkin or Boyd Tinsley sprinkled here and there, we would find rafts of Black kids scratching out scales on their matchbox violins so that someday they might play the impossible. Beethoven's Sonata No. 9 in A major, Opus 47, also known as the Bridge Tower. What you will hear at the beginning of that sonata is something that everyone thought was insane at that time. You will hear a solo violin. Then you'll hear a solo piano. And it's a call and response. They talk to one another.
It is the power of music to carry one directly into the mental state of the composer. The listener has no choice. It is like hypnotism.
So the poet as witness. Where is the poet in the poem? In order to even begin to approach Bridge Tower story poetically, that I had to figure out how to bear witness.
But when you're writing music, you sort of choose what you do want to put in your music. You don't write music for an exercise to show all of the different things that you know how to do as a composer, or you're not really being authentic to your own music.
Because I was historian, poet, I created him.
If you're able to do it in the late 1700s, early 1800s, then you're able to do it now.
Yes, and that was one of the things that drove me to write the book. I was curious to find out exactly how people regarded a mixed race person, and it was radically different from what happens in this country. It's also really incredible that this mixed race child could grow up and become a prodigy 200 years before, Obama becomes president. There are so many parallels and echoes here.
And that is our final presentation for the evening. I want to thank UC Skeet for your fantastic reading. I must say that we have presented 5 personalities, actually 7, because the Barclays are 2 and the Fords are 2. And it is hard to say which one strikes me most, but I must say that I just love the Sonata Mulatica. It is almost beyond belief that Black Barbadians could be so high in society at that time in history, and that a Black Barbadian would have inspired. There's more to this story, but there's all that we cannot tell tonight. Unfortunately, not known for it. An amazing journey. All of these journeys are amazing. Each can stand on its own. We could have split the Barclays in 2 separate presentations. We could have split the Fords, although I'm sure the Fords would not have liked that if they were here. They stood together and made history. And I hope you've enjoyed this as much as it was a joy for me to research it and present it. And the more you learn about Black history, the more astounded you are by the accomplishments that are there that we do not know. I saw a note in the chat that I believe from Dr. Laurel Scott, that she only knew of Ken Farnham. And that just says something, because I know Dr. Scott and I know that she knows her history as well. So we all have a lot to learn and we all have a lot to share. And if we understand our shared histories, a lot of things would fall into place. I know Mr. Basil Levine was with us earlier. I don't know if he's still with us.
Yes, sir, I'm still with you.
I'm gonna give Mr. Levine the first shot at the mic, so to speak, so he can share some good news with us on Ken Farnham.
Good evening, Honorable Consul General, members of the Farnham family, distinguished guests, and all the ladies and gentlemen in attendance at this evening's proceedings. Let me say thanks for this opportunity to make a very short contribution in these celebrations. The video presented on Ken Farnham saves me from having to relate a lot of the stories that my father told me when I didn't even know or understand what Ken Farnham was about. Until about 10 or 12 years ago, I came into contact with a lady who turned to be Ken's sister, and we were speaking about Commandeer School was called as honoring really outstanding alumni of the school. And there she was telling about this brother she has in New York, who she believed might be somebody we might be interested in. And in light of the fact that a lot of things got into the way, it never happened. And last year, of course, he passed away. So in light of that, and what we were thinking in terms of hearing of his success in his standing as the first Barbadian Olympian, we have now, and I say I'm working at the school with the family to immortalize Ken in a way that we think that it should be, by the establishment of a bronze tablet in the foyer at Commandeer School, all to his honored memory. I just wanted to say those two things, and it reflects the honor and the pride the school as associated with being the alma mater of this outstanding Barbadian, being the first Barbadian Olympian. And just let me say, to get a plaque on anywhere on the school's wall is a major thing. You don't get, to get a plaque on the school is a major achievement.
Thank you. Hopefully there will be some other honors for Ken Farnham. His family is still around, so it is better to honor our people when they're alive, but nevertheless, hopefully there will be some other tangible tributes to Ken Farnham. As I said earlier, I too was fascinated when I heard his story. One of these days, I probably will get to share that with you. So we've been here a long time, and all good things must come to an end. We're gonna play two songs back to back. They're not by Barbadians, they're by our fellow Caribbean citizens from Trinidad. And we're playing them because we think they're relevant, very relevant to the times that we are in. Still very relevant to the Black struggle, especially as we've seen what has happened over the past year. And there used to be a cigarette ad, say Virginia Slims, I think. We've come a long way. Well, we might have, but we still have a long way to go. I believe that once we strive to understand each other's cultures, if we can understand, get to share cultures, then a lot of what unfolds would not happen. Yes, there are always the power struggles and so on. But once you sit down and, as we say in Barbados, break bread with someone and you get to know that person, at the end of the day, you do realize one thing, that whether we're white, brown, pink, or yellow, we all want the same thing. We all want good lives. We all want good families. We all want safety and the best for our children. And we really must come to a point where these things can be reconciled. So I invite you to listen to these two songs, and I'll come back with a final close-up.
We see on the news each day, human lives are blown away. Mothers and fathers crying, burying their dead and dying. How many more, I hear them say. Death is the highest price. Death is the total sacrifice. Yeah, brothers rather commit suicide than continue with apartheid. I just beg me, Father, each day. Tell me, Father, tell me, how many more must die? How many more? How many Mr. Reagan, how many more must die for their dignity? Well, how many more before you set South Africa free? Demand, I quote, is simply one man, one vote. But this was Mr. Botha's answer. Bullets, tear gas, and murder. Every day is a massacre. Then he publicly stated his view. He said, black people like me and you will always be dominated and forcibly subjugated, and we'll have no say in South Africa. Help we, Father, help we. How many more must die? How many more? How many more must die? How many more? How many more must die for their liberty? Well, how many more before they set South Africa free? Mr. Botha, how many more must die? How many more? How many more must die? How many more? How many more must die for their dignity? Well, how many more before you set South Africa free, Mistress Thatcher? Today is just a short fuse away from a total confrontation between the black and white man. We want with freedom, may people say. They have made it very plain. No more turning back again. Freedom is the only answer. No compromise, no surrender. Lord, I see it death in South Africa. Help we, Father, help we. How many more must die? How many more? How many more must die? How many more? How many more must die for their liberty? Lord, how many more before you set South Africa free? Mr. Botha, how many more must die? How many more? How many more must die? How many more? How many more must die for their liberty? Lord, how many more before you set South Africa free, Mistress Thatcher? Western's hypocrisy, now exposed for all to see. They're going to the greatest extreme to protect their racist regime while extending their sympathy to it. But history will denounce the shame. I say they're the ones to blame, protecting their vested interests, impeding the black man's progress, the so-called gods of democracy. Murder, Mr. Botha, how many more must die? How many more? How many more must die? How many more? How many more must die for their liberty? Lord, how many more before they set South Africa free? Mr. Botha, how many more must die? How many more? Mistress Thatcher, how many more must die? How many more? Mr. Reagan, how many more must die for their dignity? Lord, how many more before you set South Africa free? Tell me, how many more must die? How many more? How many more must die? How many more? is 400 years now and over. All them superpower try to invade Africa. Yes, they went down there with all the lust and the greed. But don't care how they try, they still can't succeed. Yes, they kill and keep killing. But the more that they kill, the more they see coming. And when they try and they can't make hand with the Africans. They just pack up the bag and they're gone to the land. Why? The more Africans they come down, it's the more Africans we come. The more warriors that they kill, it's the more they see coming. They kill Zulu, they kill Zulu, they kill Mosi, they kill Swansea, Matambele, Katambele. The more warriors that they gone down. We get back Mozambique so easy. Zimbabwe and Angola are ready. And if it's one team as sure now as ever, Namibia and South Africa round the corner. Yes, it's one bomb that drop on Hiroshima. And they get the whole of Japan to surrender. And in 200 years, red out on the reservation. But for 400 years, they still can't subdue African. The more warriors they go down, it's the more warriors we come. The more Africans that they kill, it's the more they still coming. They kill Tutu, they kill Toba, they kill Ashanti, they kill Watusi, they kill Benin, they kill Swahili. The more African that they go down. They deal with Lumumba long ago. Yes, they deal with Moboya and Steve Biko. Yes, they keep killing leaders after leader. But don't care how much they kill, Africans won't surrender. And how come these same people want to tell me Africans today have no unity? But I know they may say a tongue, they may say a man. But one day Africa will be living under one flag. The more Africans they come down, it's the more Africans we come. The more warriors that they kill, it's the more they see coming. They kill Zulu, they kill Mali, they kill Ashanti, they kill Benin, they kill Asanto.
All right, and there we have it, folks. I think the songs are of a different time, but the lyrics are pretty much applicable now. Let's all strive to make a better world. But I believe in putting action to what I say. So if I'm saying that African history should be every month, then I should be leading and doing something every month. As I said, we had planned for 2 events. The other one will be a little lighter and more inclusive. I'll try to involve the audience in some quizzes and some other interesting stuff, because there's all different ways that we can learn about our history and we can learn from one another. While we were having this session, I don't know if she's still on, but there with us was our own Dr. Velma Scanberry, who has made history in the USA as the first Black female transplant surgeon. Someday, she has a book out, but that is only a small one. I know another one is coming, so that will add to the legacy of the Black history of great Barbadians. I want to thank all our association members who are always there supporting. Again, apologies to those who couldn't get on. I want to thank everyone for attending, taking the time out. We did say we would take 3 hours. That is about where we are. As I did say, history is a long thing. We can't shortchange our people. I would also acknowledge, I believe I saw one MP from Barbados, MP for St. Peter, Colin Jordan. I don't know if he's still on, but thanks for taking some time to attend. I know there's a difficult situation in Barbados, but I'm sure, as we always do, that we will make it true. So in closing, let me thank everyone. I want to thank Reverend Laurel Scott for her prayers. I want to thank Ashley Braffett. Of course, our phenomenal readers, Dolores Wallace, Helen Walker, Miguel Edgel, Brianna Taylor, and Mr. UC Keith. We can give them a little hand. You can unmute yourselves, and they were awesome, awesome. And of course, I want to thank Treva Holder for her background work. Hey, brother and sister Eastman. And I want to thank Sonia Clark, who really pulled this thing together. Technically, our technical person, our normal technical person. There's Bowman. Yes, waving there. One thing, it is always great to see great people always supporting the cause. And that is, Valma is always there supporting, no matter what. Upcoming, Sonia, I'm sorry, I was with Sonia. Our normal technical person couldn't make it today, but Sonia pulled out the stops and delivered. Thank you, Sonia. Great job. Great job.
Thank you.
So we will come back with our second program shortly. We would like to see everyone attending some of the other sessions that we have. We're still in pandemic times, so we will continue to do some sessions on Zoom. There is one coming up featuring Dr. Scanderbury and our own infectious specialist, Dr. Graves. That is a follow-on from one that was done by CAMSA, one of our associations, and BACA and the nurses, because we think that it's important to keep getting behind the vaccines and letting the medical people lead the way, while the rest of us just get out the way and let them do what they have to do. And with that, the last word is that we are still in serious times, and always remember, whether you've had the vaccine or not, I've had my first shot. Smooth as silk. I go forward to some better things, all of us together. In the meantime, let's keep wearing our masks. Let's keep physically distancing. Let's keep sanitizing. Let's keep looking out for one another.
Amen.
I want to thank you all again. It's been a great evening. And we will continue with your support to do good things. Thanks, everyone. Have a
Thank you.
good night and a great week.
You too.
Thank you.